you may be around the world, and thank you for your company on truth2u.org. That's truth2u.org. Joining me is the Director of Education and Counseling for Jews for Judaism in Canada. The website is jewsforjudaism.ca. That's jewsforjudaism.ca. Welcome back to the program, Rabbi Michael Skobac.
Hello, Jono. Good to be here with you.
Wonderful to have you back on this 31st of October, at least here in Australia it is the day on which we are recording this program. It'll be so for you tomorrow. That is, of course, what day is that?
Tomorrow will be Friday the 31st.
Which is?
Friday the 31st.
Which is?
All Saints Eve or something? All Hallows Eve?
Something like that. Halloween. And
I think it was called Samhain at one point.
Really?
I think the pagan festival was called Samhain. And they believed that disembodied spirits were roaming that night. I mean, there's a whole strange history to this day.
I'm not going to let us get through this program without throwing in a little bit of that theme in the interest of Halloween. And the day on which we are recording, I think we can do, because there's certainly some scary ones in this part of the list that we're heading towards, and we're going to keep that in mind. Now, we are, of course, investigating the 365 alleged Messianic prophecies in the Tanakh that Jesus supposedly fulfilled in the New Testament. We are up to, good heavens, I think we're up to 105 on the list. You can find this list on various websites, including that of Truth to You critic Carmen Welker, who passionately endorses this list. Thank you, Carmen, for supplying it, because she set it out so very nicely on her website. And there is a link to the entire list on her website on this post. Shall we begin, my friend?
So are we on 105 or 135?
Did I say 105? 135, you're absolutely correct. 135 is where we are at on the list. And this is the way it begins. It says number 135, Psalm 100. We're in the 100s now. Psalm 100, verse 5. And that's, in fact, can I read the entirety of Psalm 100 because it's so beautiful?
Short. It's very short and
it's short.
Sweet.
It's only got 5. It's short and sweet. It says, make a joyful noise to the Lord. Now, that's the tetragrammaton there. It says, make a joyful noise to the Lord, all you lands. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before his presence with singing. Know that the Lord, he is God. It is he who has made us, and not we ourselves. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter into his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise. Be thankful to him and bless his name, for the Lord is good, his mercy is everlasting, and his truth endures to all generations.
That's truth to you.
That is truth to you, isn't that great? Oh, man, I love that's Psalm 100, and what a great way to start the program. Now, on this list, it lines that with Matthew chapter 19, verses 16 and 17. And what that says is, now behold, one came and said to him, that's Jesus, one came and said to him, good teacher, what good thing shall I do that I may receive eternal life? And so Jesus answered him and said, why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God. But if you want to enter into life, keep the commandments. Well, that's good on him. I think that's most commendable. But according to this list, number 135, the Messianic prophecy that is fulfilled is that his character will be good.
That's nice.
That's nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
As you say, mazel tov.
Good for him.
So,
this one left me scratching my head. I was really thinking about this list that we're working our way through during the break we've had between our sessions, and it sort of took me back to when I was about 17 or 18 years old, or in the early years of my life, when I was trying to apply for jobs certain times, and maybe in my early 20s even, and I didn't really have any work experience, but you had to come up with a resume. And so, people in this situation are very used to the whole exercise of really ending up padding your resume with things that were not really jobs, and you would try and take something that you did and maybe divide it into different items on your resume so it didn't look like you just did one thing. So I really had this sense that that's really what we're looking at in this list here, is a padded resume.
There's a lot of padding out.
Yeah, I mean, you have double dippings and repetitions and, the same kind of thing over and over again. And here, it's very clear when you read this psalm that it's talking about the Lord. It's talking about God.
It says.
It says it straight out. It's actually, this psalm was recited actually in the holy temple. One of the sacrifices that was brought in the temple was called the Korban Todah, the Thanksgiving offering.
Mm-hmm.
And the sages teach that there were certain times in a person's life that this was obligatory if they went through a dangerous, life-threatening situation. The Talmud actually gives a verse from the Bible as a mnemonic. It says the verse says, "V'kol hachayim yodu chasela," and all life will praise you and thank you. And the word chayim for life has 4 Hebrew letters. The chet, the yud, and the mem. The chet stands for chole, sick. That if someone was recovering from a serious illness, they would have to bring a free will or a Thanksgiving offering. The yud would stand, there's 2 yuds. One stands for the word yam, ocean. So if you were crossing an ocean, which was a dangerous voyage, then the yud also stands for yisurim, prison, someone that was in prison. And finally, mem for midbar, someone who crossed the desert. Today, it's customary to actually say a special prayer in the synagogue if you've done like a cross-ocean flight on a plane, or you've done something else if you were mugged, God forbid, and you came out okay. So this was the psalm that was actually recited in the Holy Temple when people brought this Thanksgiving offering, which was called a Todah, and hence the first 2 words here, a psalm of the Thanksgiving. It wasn't just
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving offering. And
well, you know what? In having said that, only yesterday the very, very sad news of Rabbi Yehuda Glick being shot 3 or 4 times, and praise God he wasn't killed. And I do believe, at least according to the news articles, he seems to be making a recovery. He's in a serious but stable condition, and they are saying that he's improving. So may it be that he gets to say this psalm of thanksgiving, Psalm 100.
I thought of that as well. God willing, he'll say it soon.
God willing, he'll say it soon, and may he be fully restored, and may his pain be kept to a minimum, and he'll come back stronger than ever, Rabbi Yehuda Glick, and you can read about that in the news.
Keep him in our prayers.
Now, in our prayers, but keep him in our prayers. It's verse 5 that says, "For the Lord is good," and obviously the correlation is that, well, at least in the list, it's saying that his character is goodness. But when it comes to Matthew chapter 19, and the rich young ruler comes and says to Jesus, "Good teacher," Jesus corrects him and says, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, and that is God."
That's what's so ironic here, that the list maker is trying to pull Jesus into this verse, and Jesus is
saying, no,
this is really about God, which is correct. This psalm is describing the character of God, and Jesus correctly says it's not me, it's God.
That's right, and good on him. And we can all agree with him as well, where he says, "But if you want to enter into life, keep the commandments."
100%.
Beautiful.
He
well done.
He basically gave the correct answer here.
He did.
And interestingly, by the way, my very hyperactive open Bible does not list this as one of the Messianic prophecies.
Okay. All right. We'll leave that one there, and moving on to number 136. It's Psalm. Well, we got a few in Psalm 102. It's an interesting psalm. Psalm 102. It begins with verse 1 to verse 11. I'm going to read that. It does say, "Hear my prayer, O Lord." Again, there's the Tetragrammaton. "Hear my prayer, O Lord, and let my cry come to you. Do not hide your face from me in the day of my trouble. Incline your ear to me in the day that I call. Answer me speedily. For my days are consumed like smoke, and my bones are burned like a heath, and my heart is stricken and withered like grass, so that I forget to eat my bread because of the sound of my groaning, and my bones cling to my skin, and I'm like a pelican in the wilderness. I'm like an owl in the desert. I lie awake, and I am like a sparrow alone on a housetop. My enemies reproach me all day long. Those who deride me and swear an oath against me, for I have eaten ashes like bread and mingled my drink with weeping because of your indignation and your wrath. For you have lifted me up and cast me away. My days are like a shadow that lengthens, and I wither away like grass." Oh, my goodness. Now, this is, in this list, it's paired with John 21:16-25. It says, he said to him again a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? And he said to him, I feel like I want to read this in my Anglican voice. Would that be all right if I did that?
I think that's how it was originally said.
I think that's right. I better do that. And so he said to him again a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, tend my sheep. And he said to him a third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he had said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Most assuredly, I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. And this he spoke, signifying what death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. And then Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following, who also had leaned on his breast at the supper, and said, Lord, who is the one who betrays you? And Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, but Lord, what about this man? And Jesus said unto him, well, if I will that he remains till I come, what is it to you? Follow me, you follow me. And then this saying went out among the brethren that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but if I will that he remain till I come, what is it to you? That's what Jesus said. Then this is the disciple who testifies these things and wrote of these things, and we all know that his testimony is true. We all know it. And there are so many other things that Jesus did, which if they were all written in one book, I suppose that even the world itself would not contain the books that would be written. Amen. So endeth the teaching.
Wow, you're quite the thespian.
Now, what, in all seriousness, what? I don't understand how that is in any way connected to Psalm 102. Can you see the connection?
You got to take those scales off your eyes, Jono.
I'm serious. I've got to. Wait a minute. I got to go back here. It says the list maker says the connection that it says. Sorry, the list maker says that the Messianic prophecy is that the suffering and the reproach of Calvary. I am totally at a loss how these two are connected, and even how that is. Well, can you tell me out?
I think it's what you call in Elizabeth in English a non sequitur, and I think that we can dispense with the passage in John 21, and clearly what the list maker is excited about, and this we've seen this before, is at any time there's a passage in the book of Psalms where someone is pained or suffering or rejected or is not popular or any kind of problem, that then it's automatically Jesus gets inserted there. And so I think that's what the attraction of this psalm is. It begins by saying in the very first verse, it's the prayer or the prayer, really, tefillah, the prayer of the ani. Now, ani can mean someone who is poor or someone who is afflicted. And so here the person's obviously writing about the horrible sufferings they went through. And I think that's the appeal here, that this must be speaking then about the suffering of Jesus, before his death on the cross. The problem again is that, and I think most Christian commentaries who are being honest recognize this, that that's all this psalm is. It's a prayer, not specifically about the Messiah. It's not a prophecy about the Messiah. By the way, if it were a prophecy, it would be pretty useless because, again, it would be speaking about anyone that's gone through suffering. So in my open Bible, which really jumps at any chance to identify a messianic prophecy with a black star next to it, there's no black star next to this. And I think many Christian Bibles actually have a superscription above most of the Psalms, almost all of them. And my New American Standard Bible says this is the prayer of an afflicted man for mercy on himself and Zion.
Okay, I've got in my New King James, it says, a prayer of the afflicted when he is overwhelmed and pours out his complaint before the Lord.
Yeah, and a Jewish Bible here I'm reading from says, a prayer for anyone beset by any misfortune. Meaning that this is a psalm, like all the psalms really, as we've said in the past, the whole importance of this book is that it's describing the kind of difficulties that human beings go through in life, and that's exactly why the book is so popular and has been such a source of strength for people. So here we're basically dealing with a generic psalm which describes suffering of not just not a particular individual, but of this idealized person here, this sort of person that represents everyone that's gone through suffering. And
so I'm going to have to conclude then that the New Testament reference that's given here is mistake.
I believe so. Yeah,
it has to be a mistake because there's nothing in that at all that we could possibly pin any sort of similarity in word or phrase. So moving on to number 137, we're still in Psalm 102. It says, Psalm 102, verse 16, for the Lord, again, the Tetragrammaton, for the Lord shall build up Zion, he shall appear in his glory. Now, the Messianic prophecy fulfilled, according to this list, is the Son of Man comes in glory, and the corresponding verses in the New Testament is Luke 21:24. It says, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Now, I don't think we need to dwell on that. Clearly, that's another mistake. There's two mistakes in a row. We're going to move on to the next. I mean, that's a mistake. Do you see a connection there?
I think Carmen's going to have to hire a better quality control person.
I think what Carmen's going to have to do is at least study the list that she professes to believe in before she puts it on her website, rather than just cut and paste like everybody else has. And like I've said to the listeners before, if you look up 365 Messianic prophecies, you'll find this very list on various websites where people have just gone, that'll do, I don't need to study that, there's so many. Cut, paste into their website and made it their own.
But I think what excites them though is really the phrase at the end of this verse. God will have built up Zion, and he will have appeared in his glory. Meaning that I think what they are latching on to is this idea of the Son of Man appearing in his glory. That I think they believe that this is somehow referencing Jesus, who appeared in his glory.
But is there anything of that in Luke 21:24?
No, I think that these New Testament cross references are mistaken. But I think what the list maker is really seizing on is this.
That's what they're trying to.
The coming of in glory.
Well, but still, in the interest of Halloween, I'm going to read the next one because the next one is that apparently is assigned to the same number, 137. We've got Luke 21:24, which you just read, but the next one is Revelation 12:5-10, which talks apparently is the messianic fulfillment of the prophecy of the Son of Man coming in glory. It says, she bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. And then the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God, and they should feed her there for 1,260 days. And war broke out in heaven. Michael, there you are, and his angels fought with the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, and nor was the place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. That's pretty appropriate for Halloween. It goes on to say, then heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down. So maybe that's supposed to be, I mean, we go back to Psalm 102, verse 16, for the Lord shall build up Zion, he shall appear in his glory.
That they're trying to make that connection. I think that, again, this has been a common, repeated mistake this list maker makes, is to take passages that are clearly and directly speaking about the Almighty, the Creator, and just slipping in, inserting an association with Jesus. So
Yep.
here they say the Son of Man comes in glory, but it's very clear that when you read this psalm, there's no reference in the psalm to the Son of Man. The psalm
No, not
speaks
at all.
directly about Tetragrammaton, about the Almighty.
Absolutely does.
And
But at least we've got some dragons, we've got the devil, we've got Satan, we got a little bit of Halloween there for the folks. There we go.
okay, keep the show going.
Okay, Psalm 102. We're still in Psalm 102. This is number 138 on the list. And it's Psalm 102, verse 25 to 27. Incidentally, Michael, this verse is the go-to verse, according to Dr. James White, the famous Calvinist apologist. You may have heard of him. You've heard of Dr. White?
I've heard of
James
Dr. White.
Yeah, Dr. James White, a very, very well-known Calvinist apologist. He says this is the go-to verse when the Jehovah's Witnesses come and knock on your door, because Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe that Jesus is God. And if you want to convince them that Jesus is God, this is what you do. You read them this, and it says, "Of old you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will endure. Yes, they will all grow old like a garment, like a cloak. You will change them, and they will be changed, but you are the same, and your years have no ends." The reason why he says that is because it's quoted in Hebrews, and this is the corresponding verse that the list gives. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 10 to 12. And it basically just quotes from the psalm that I just read. But the difference is, in Hebrews, it has the Creator saying to the Son that verse. And in that sense, when you look at the verse in Psalms, it's very clearly talking about God. But here in Hebrews, God is calling Jesus God by quoting this verse to him, and that, according to Dr. James White, is how you convince a Jehovah's Witness that Jesus is God.
So that makes sense if the speaker and the listener both see the Hebrew Scriptures through the lenses of the Greek Testament, meaning that what Christians often don't realize they're doing is they're understanding the Hebrew Scriptures through basically Jesus glasses. And you put those Jesus glasses on when you've been informed by the teachings of the gospel writers and the epistles. So Hebrews is basically framing Psalms for you. And Hebrews is giving you the ability to look at the book of Psalms and make this incredible leap and mistake, really, that Dr. White makes, which is to take a passage in the Hebrew Scriptures, which is very clearly speaking about the Almighty, the Creator, and just sort of switching that. It's almost like a magic trick. You switching one person for the next. And now Jesus somehow becomes, so Dr. White he sees very clearly that somehow Psalm 102 is speaking about Jesus. And if that's the case, then you could see the compelling nature of his argument, because the psalm speaks here about the subject of this psalm is eternal. And so that would certainly be a good rejoinder to, the Christians who don't believe in the divinity of Jesus. But again, you see that his error really is caused. It's almost it's a methodological error that's caused by the mistake of almost somehow being tricked by putting on the wrong reading glasses for the Hebrew Scriptures, because obviously when the Hebrew Scriptures were written and they were understood for centuries, people didn't have gospel glasses they were wearing. They were wearing clear glasses where they saw the text of the Hebrew Scriptures in its own context, and they weren't filtered through this.
It wasn't, Bill. It's very, very clear. In verse 1, it says, "Hear my prayer, O Lord." There's the Tetragrammaton. Verse 12, "But you, O Lord," the Tetragrammaton. Verse 15, "So the nations shall fear the name of the Lord," the Tetragrammaton there. In 16, "For the Lord shall build up Zion," as we just read. And in 18, the people to be created may praise the Lord. There's the Tetragrammaton. And it goes on like that. It's very, very clear who it's talking about. There's no question.
Yeah, so we know what causes the Christian to make this mistake is that they've been primed. They've been they've been sort of directed, because Hebrews informs their entire perspective on the Jewish Scriptures, on the Hebrew Scriptures. And so that's it's easy to see the sort of the genesis of their error.
There it is. 139 on the list. We get out of Psalm 102. We move into Psalm 109, and there are a number of references in this chapter as well. Psalm 109, verse 4 is the first one, which reads, "In return for my love, they are my accusers, but I give myself to prayer." Now, the Messianic prophecy fulfilled here, apparently, is that the Messiah will pray for his enemies. And the corresponding verse for that, according to this list, is Luke 23, verse 34, which says, "Then Jesus said, 'Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do.'" Now, the thing I find interesting about this is, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but in Psalm 109, it continues on, and David, the prayer seems to be there from verse 6 and on, and it says, "Let a wicked man, set a wicked man over him, and let an accuser stand at his right hand. And when he is judged, let him be found guilty, and let his prayer become sin, and let his days be few, and let another take his office, and let his children be fatherless, and his wife a widow, and his children continually be vagabonds and beg, and let them seek bread also from their desolate places. Let the creditor seize all that he has, and let the strangers plunder his labor. Let there be no one to extend mercy to him, nor let there be any favor to his fatherless children. Let his posterity be cut off, and in the generation following, let their name be blotted out. Let the iniquity of these fathers be remembered before the Lord, and let not the sin of his mother be blotted out. Let them be continually before the Lord, that he may cut off the memory of them from the earth, because he did not remember to show mercy, but persecuted the poor and the needy man, that he might even slay the broken in heart." And the interesting thing about that in verse 6, where it says, "Let an accuser stand at his right side," what word is that?
Satan, I think.
It is Satan. It says, "Let a Satan." He's praying that a Satan would stand at his right side, an opposer, an accuser, stand at his right side. And that's very different to the prayer that we see from Jesus, right? I mean, thoughts?
Well, part of this is going to have to be, we can discuss the entire psalm, because it's going to really come up in the next piece here. It's actually, the commentaries to this psalm are not really exactly clear about whose prayer this is. Mm-hmm. And it's taken in two different ways. One way that this prayer is taken is that it's really a long malediction of curses that David's enemies are directing at him, meaning what the psalmist here is...
interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
The psalmist here is really illustrating and expressing the kind of abuse that David was facing.
Subject to, okay.
Yeah, and of course the other way this is read, and I think the other way of reading it is problematic, and I think it's problematic for the list maker, because, when you say, oh, someone is praying for their enemies, it sounds very sweet. But when you read the content of this prayer, this is not the kind of prayer that you want to have someone giving for you.
No.
So it's hard to understand, why, if this is not about David, meaning if this is not the curses that people are cursing David with, but if this is David really directing these thoughts towards his enemies, it's not. It seems a little bit rough, because normally we know that throughout the Psalms and throughout his life, David usually met his tormentors with silence. He doesn't usually strike back with venom. And this seems to be pretty vicious in terms of what he's asking for. So some of the commentaries point out that this was really directed toward particularly sort of difficult enemy that he faced, who was really sort of someone that was an informer on him, someone that was really particularly heinous.
Well, but it seems to be plural, though, because when we get to verse 20, it says, "Let this be the Lord's reward to my accusers and to those who speak evil against my person."
Yeah, it's a hard one. Meaning that first of all, the psalm doesn't really, if it is David praying for the downfall of his enemies, doesn't really identify who they are. And that's one of the things that Bible commentaries will fight about.
But of course, he knows. Well, yeah, I know. he knows that God knows who he's talking about, and
Yes.
and why? Yeah, that's right.
The question is, who, from our point of view, who is it?
We don't know. Yeah.
So if we go back to this one on the list, it's again, let's understand from the perspective of the list maker what's really going on here. The list maker is claiming that this is a messianic prophecy, which means basically that God in his mercy, because it's so important for us to recognize who the Messiah is, because from the list maker's point of view, not to be able to know who the Messiah is doesn't allow you to be saved from eternal damnation. So God in his great mercy and kindness provided us with evidence and descriptions that would clearly identify the Messiah. That's the basic premise of this list, that God is giving us overwhelming evidence to tell us who his Messiah will be so that we can be able to know who he is and thereby be saved. So again, the question is this really a messianic prophecy? Meaning, did God in the Bible tell us that, yes, one of the things that will identify the Messiah is he'll be someone who prays for his enemies? So again, when I read Psalm 109, I don't see anything there. Again, if I'm reading it before Jesus, without Jesus' glasses, just in terms of its own context, nothing to tell me that it's about the Messiah or that it's a prophecy. And as a matter of fact, my open Bible does not identify this as a messianic prophecy. My New King James Study Bible doesn't identify this as a messianic prophecy. And even if it were a messianic prophecy, it would be pretty useless because it wouldn't point specifically to Jesus. My wife and I, for example, every Motzei Shabbat, after Shabbat, when we do Havdalah, we light the candles and we have spices and we have wine, but we spend about a half hour praying for many different things and many different people. But one of the things we pray for the enemies of the Jewish people, that they should repent. That's one of the things we do every single week. So it's not only the Messiah here or Jesus that prays for his enemies. I think that it's done by many, 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 many people. So it wouldn't really be a useful messianic prophecy. And it's interesting.
So let me ask you, is there a black star next to the ensuing verses 7 and 8? Because according to the writer of Acts, the fact that they replaced Judas with somebody else is a fulfillment of what is written in the book of Psalms. It says so, for it is written in the Psalms, it says in Acts chapter 1 verse 20, let his dwelling place be desolate and let none live in it, let another take his office. Do you have a black star there?
Actually, I don't, which is interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah, the Open Bible, which is so liberal in dispensing these black stars, does not award it to Psalm 109 verses 7 and 8. And again,
because that's number 140 on this list.
Yeah.
That another would succeed Judas, and it references Acts. But the thing that I find interesting about that, and I did emphasize it when I read it, it does say in Psalm 109 verse 13, it says, let their, plural, their name be blotted out. If it was in reference to Judas, it would say his name be blotted out, and we wouldn't know his name. And then further on in verse 15, that God may cut off the memory of them, not him, but of them from the earth. If it was about Judas, it would say him, and we wouldn't know his name.
Yeah, and of course, the psalm does not mention Judas by name. And it would be a pretty strange messianic prophecy, meaning that, why does the fact that an evil person is going to be succeeded by someone else help identify the Messiah? I mean, what would one have to do with the other? But again, it's really not clear when we read this psalm, who really is being cursed here. This very well might even be, the kind of thing that people said about David, right? And that David was being cursed, that he should be succeeded by someone else. He should be done away with and succeeded. So, again,
but we know that there were people who thought as much.
Yeah, for sure. And I think again, one of the things I speak about in my lectures on the Messiah is that the thing that characterizes real messianic prophecy is that they're very, very clear and precise. And, this is so fuzzy and so unclear that it doesn't really pass the sniff test of what a real messianic prophecy would be.
Well, speaking of fuzzy and unclear, we're going to continue. This is the last reference of Psalm 109. This is 141, number 141 on the list. Psalm 109, verse 25, well, it says, I also have become a reproach to them. When they look at me, they shake their heads. Now, this apparently is a messianic prophecy that the Messiah would be ridiculed. And the corresponding verse is Matthew 27, verse 39, which says, and those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads.
Yeah, this is one of the examples we've had of double dipping, because we've had numerous examples in the Psalms of someone being ridiculed or mocked. And so, the list maker is able to get, 6 or 7 added to the list, because it's not just one psalm that speaks about this Messiah being mocked, but it's 7 or 8. So it's a very easy way again of padding this list here. Nothing new is really being added. I think I gave the example once of the people who sell household cleaners, and they'll say it has 1,000 uses. Well, that's sort of
Well, go through them while you're standing there at the door. Can you just tell me what they are? Let's go through them.
Well, it'll clean your bathroom windows and your bedroom windows and your car windows. I mean, that's what happens here.
And your glasses.
It's not really a wonderfully powerful messianic prophecy. By the way, my open Bible does not give this a black star.
You don't even have a black star on that one.
Not
All right.
even this one.
Okay. Well, let's move on from that one. But before we get past Matthew 27, because I did say, in the interest of Halloween, we're going to take advantage of that. Matthew 27. Now, this couple of verses, verse 52 and 53, is nowhere on this list. Nowhere on this list. But considering the day on which we are recording, I'm going to read it. It says, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of their graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many.
It sounds like a Michael Jackson video.
He did do a video like that, didn't he?
Sounds like a Thriller.
It was Thriller. Now, Jason of Spiritualbabies.net, he brought this to my attention just earlier today, and he said, you know what that means? I said, no. He said, that means that after Jesus died, immediately, it says, that when he had died, the graves were open and the bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. Now, here we have corpses, and they were raised, but he said they stayed in their tombs until he was resurrected. So they were there for Christians would have us believe 3 days and 3 nights or whatever, or even if it's a day and a half or 2.5 days. They laid there in their tombs, and after he was resurrected, then they said, right, let's get up and go into the city.
That's unpleasant.
That's not Halloween.
Yeah.
Come on.
When I first read this passage in Matthew, I said to myself, this was not very clever of the gospel writer, meaning that if I was writing this story, I might have been tempted to make the claim that, that this great miracle happened. And I would have said that the graves of many righteous people opened up, and they came out and they walked all around Jerusalem, and I would have shut my mouth at that point. Mm-hmm. The problem is, by saying, and they appeared to many people, so if that really happened, we would expect that would have been a pretty big news story. I mean, that's not something which happens, as we say in Yiddish, every Montag and Donnerstag, every Monday and Thursday. That would be big news. People are seeing these great righteous people coming out of their graves and appearing to many people. Not only, they appear to many, and you would think that, 1 or 2 of those many, 10 or 20 of those many might have documented such an event in some sort of way, at least the children of the people, because you'd be talking about it for the rest of your life. At least maybe the children of the eyewitnesses may have written about it somewhere. Or those people who actually came up out of the graves, if I was one of them, I would have surely documented such an incredible event and said, hey, this is me. I died 100 years ago, but now blah, blah, blah. Do we have anything like that? Well, first of all, it doesn't appear in any Jewish sources whatsoever. And again, you have to remember, this would not have been the kind of miracle that would have given any kind of credence to, an upstart idolatrous religion. This was before Christianity. You just would have had this evening in Jerusalem when all these righteous people walk around and appear to all these other people in Jerusalem. that would have been the kind of thing that would have gotten some buzz. People would talk about it, and it would certainly make it into historical records. Josephus would have written about. Josephus wrote about what people had for dinner. This would have been a story to write about. Doesn't make it into any of the books of the Talmud. Doesn't make into any Roman historical sources. Nothing. And what's interesting is it doesn't make it into any other passages in the Christian scriptures. Mark doesn't write about it. Luke doesn't write about it. John doesn't write about it. Acts doesn't write about it. Paul doesn't write about it.
Nowhere else.
So it's sort of it's peculiar that if this really did happen, it's similar to the story in Matthew chapter 2 when Herod sends this little delegation to kill all the Jewish babies in Bethlehem and all the surrounding cities under the age of 2. That's also the kind of massacre
that would have made the front news somewhere.
That would
at
have
least.
been very big. That's a big story to kill every Jewish baby under the age of 2. So it's again reported nowhere, not in the Roman records, not in Josephus, not in Philo, not in the Talmud. There's no fast day instituted for this, and none of the other gospel writers write about it. It's zero. So it really it strains credibility to hear this kind of a claim when it really would have been a tremendous, tremendous news story. Now, if the response would be, I can hear this coming. Well, these are people that were dead in their graves, and maybe no one recognized them, and so they weren't recognized as righteous people, and no one would have.
I thought you meant because they were dead in their graves and they was looking all kind of zombie-like.
Well, they
no
probably
one
looked pretty
them.
weird. Although it's interesting, by the way, that we have stories.
Zombie apocalypse of Matthew 27.
We have stories. It's very interesting that when righteous people, we know that righteous people, there have been stories where, for whatever reason, they had to be reinterred. I've heard stories like this from people that witnessed it. And they would dig up the bodies a year or two later, maybe even more than that. And they would be totally whole. They would no deterioration whatsoever. So it's not impossible that someone could be dead and buried and, not decomposed. But, assuming that this is a normal situation where these decomposed zombie creatures came out of their graves. So, maybe that would have made the news, but
that definitely, maybe they weren't recognized, but that would have made the news. But you would think that if this was if this actually happened, here is a miracle, something that God has done. Therefore, He would have restored them, completely restored them. For what? What, to live out a few more years and then to die later again?
Good question.
Pretty weird. Anyway, the thing that really struck me, as Jason pointed out to me, is that they were raised as soon as after Jesus had died, but they didn't come out until after his resurrection. So there they are, living in open tombs and graves and ossuaries and whatever. But after he was resurrected, then they came into the city, apparently, and appeared to many. Very, very Halloween-worthy. Thought I'd throw it into the mix while we were in Matthew 27. Shall we move on?
Okay, now we're here.
Now here where we are, of course, is this is something we can sink our teeth into. That is, of course, Psalm 110, and this is number 142 on the list, Psalm 110, verse 1. In fact, I think I'll just read Psalm 110. Is that okay?
Yeah, they pull 3 rabbits out of this one hat here.
There's a number of rabbits in this one. So, and it begins with the very curious opening. The Lord said to my Lord, and we'll get back to that, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord shall send the rod of your strength out of Zion, rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people shall be volunteers in the day of your power, in the beauties of holiness from the womb, of the morning. You have the dew of your youth. The Lord has sworn and will not relent. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. The Lord is at your right hand. He shall execute kings in the day of his wrath. He shall judge among the nations. He shall fill the places with dead bodies. He shall execute the heads of many countries. He shall drink of the brook by the wayside. Therefore he shall lift up the head. This is 142, but yeah, the first thing that they say is
son of David.
Son of David. The Messianic prophecy fulfilled here is that the Messiah will be a son of David. Well, yeah, we know that.
Right.
No kidding. But where is that stated here in verse 1?
Exactly. This doesn't speak about the son of David. It just speaks about David. How they get from David to son of David is a mystery. And even if we want to allow for their claim here, the claim is basically, again, almost circular reasoning. It's just simply saying that the Messiah will be a son of David. Well, we know that the Messiah, that by definition, we know in the Hebrew scriptures had to be a son of David. So this is nothing new that we're learning. And again, it is just giving you the genealogical requirement of the Messiah. It doesn't prove that Jesus was the Messiah for two reasons. Number one, we don't know for sure that Jesus was a legal descendant of David through his son Solomon. That's up for grabs. But again, even if he were, it wouldn't prove that he was the Messiah. Even if he were, it would just be an indication that he was in the proper genealogical line. It doesn't mean that everyone from that line is ipso facto the Messiah. So this is a pretty lame prophecy, because the prophecy is simply saying in some ways that, there's going to be a Messiah who will be descendant of David. Okay.
So I feel that the list maker must think that the claim is strengthened by the corresponding verse that they've given to number 142, and that is Matthew chapter 22. And if I may, I'll read that because it's so relevant to this passage. And it's Matthew 22. I'll read from 41 to 45, if that's okay. And this is a conversation between Jesus and the Pharisees. And the Pharisees were gathered together, and Jesus asked them, saying, "What do you think about the Messiah, the Christ? Whose son is he?" And they said to him, "The son of David." They were right, of course. And he said to them, "Well, how then does David in the Spirit call him Lord, saying, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool'? If David then calls him Lord, how can he be his son?" And no one was able to answer him a word, nor from that day on did anyone dare question him anymore. Michael?
I'll tell you what I think of when I think of this story. Because I think that when Christians read this story, their chests swell up and they feel, oh, look, our Jesus was able to trounce those arrogant Pharisees and put them in their place. When I read this story, what I see in front of my eyes is, a 12-year-old kid who has just learned how to do magic. And, very awkwardly. And he goes up to a group of professional magicians and he pulls out a coin from behind one of their ears. And, and so there, right?
And stands there like, hey,
see what I've done?
You didn't see that one coming. I bet you can't do that, huh?
As if
someone tell me how good I am.
As if these magicians are going to be blown away by that. And that's what it sounds like to me, that here, there's this almost ridiculous interchange between Jesus and the Pharisees. He asks them a question which, you wouldn't need a rabbinic Pharisaical sage. You could have any high school kid back then would have punctured this. So to anyone who knows a bit of Hebrew, the whole story is a little bit hard to understand, because we're left wondering why are the Pharisees left here bewildered by his question. It's a strange story. We're going to have to in the later part of this list of Messianic proof texts sort of analyze the grammatical mistake here, the translation mistake that's made. This is not a graduate level degree mistake. This is a third or fourth grade mistake. But again, it would be imperceptible to the non-Hebrew reader, meaning that when reading this in an English translation, we can understand why the text is a little bit slippery.
We can, because it begins with "the Lord said to my Lord." Of course, we have two Lords there. It's the same word, but there's a slight difference in the English translation. The first Lord, of course, is in capitals. The second Lord begins with a capital, but follows with lowercase. What does that mean?
I'm not sure that all Christian Bibles make that differentiation, and I'm not sure that all readers really catch that distinction. I think that the reader, reads "the Lord said to my Lord," and it sounds like, that I think most readers take the word Lord as divinity, as divine. So that's the problem here, that when you're reading this in an English translation, especially in a Christian English translation, it's, you could scratch your head and say, oh, there's something here going on, which seems to indicate that again, as the list maker here says, this son of David is not just a regular human being. He's being referred to as Lord.
As the Lord.
Yeah. So maybe before I get to that, let me just sort of tick off the very next
Sure, yeah, there's one in between that question. That's number 143, and it still lists Psalm 110, verse 1. And the Messianic prophecy fulfilled is to ascend to the right hand of the Father. And the verse given is Mark 16, verse 19, which says, "So then, after the Lord had spoken to them, he was received up into heaven and sat down at the right hand of God."
Yeah, so this, I can see Christians getting excited about this. But, in the Bible, we often have terminology, expressions to relate closeness to God, which clearly are anthropomorphic. For example, the Bible speaks about the Jewish people as God's son, as his begotten son.
Mm-hmm.
So we see Exodus 4, verse 22.
Yep.
The Bible says that Israel is my firstborn son. I think Deuteronomy 32 speaks about Israel as being God's begotten son. So this is an expression. I think also that God refers to Solomon as his son as well.
Yes.
So it's an expression denoting closeness. And so in the Bible, sitting at the right hand of someone is, again, just an expression of closeness. I think that Bathsheba is sat at the right hand of Solomon, her son. I think it's in 1 Kings chapter 2. So it's not important to know, we don't care exactly where she sat, but it's an expression denoting a position of respect and closeness. So again, but for the Christian reader, this is another part of the picture which helps elevate who they believe the subject here to be. They take it literally, that this person is going to be literally sitting at the right hand of God. Again, I think even for the Christian, they ultimately will have to anthropomorphize this, because I don't think the Christians really believe that God in heaven is physical and sits on a physical throne and has a right or a left. I think that even the Christian will be forced to read this in a more symbolic way, that it's just basically a way of expressing someone having a certain sign, a certain position of respect in the eyes of God. But the translation issue comes about really by confusing two Hebrew words which are similar but not the same. It's interesting that you have, traditional Jews don't usually pronounce the Tetragrammaton, and so when we read it, we say Adonai. Adonai would be the my Lord. We would say my Lord, sure. And we don't have that term. That term is basically used for for God Himself. That's not the word here for God in this verse. Here it's actually the Tetragrammaton. Meaning that that word that we use for the Tetragrammaton, Adonai, sometimes is written in the Bible to describe God. But here it's the actual Tetragrammaton. And it's saying that the Lord, the Almighty, said not to my Lord, but the Hebrew word is Ladoni. Now, they're really mixing up these two words, Adonai and Adoni. They sound very similar. They look very similar, but they're very, very different. Again, the word... Well, we know the Yud Hey Vav Kei, the Tetragrammaton, is clearly the Almighty God, the Creator. Again, pronounced by many Jewish people as Adonai. But Adoni in the Bible, which is the second word here, simply means my master. And in the Bible, it's only used in reference to human beings. I'll just tick off some of the places that you'll find it for listeners that are interested in checking this out. You find it in Genesis 24, where Eliezer, Abraham's servant, is speaking to Rebekah's family about his master. He speaks about Abraham as my master, as Adoni. You find it used in Genesis 32 many, many times. I think verses 5, 6, and 19. And then in Genesis 33, verses 8, 12, 14, and 15, where Jacob refers to his brother Esau as Adoni, my master.
Oh, really?
You find it in 1 Samuel 24:8, where David refers to Saul as his master, as
Hmm.
Adoni.
Hmm.
You find it, again, I'm skipping back here, back in Genesis 23, where the children of Chet refer to Abraham as their master. You
Hmm.
find it in 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 2 and 17, where David's men and then Bathsheba refer to him as Adoni, my master. And then you see it in 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 24 to 27, where Nathan the prophet refers to David as Adoni. And there are other places. I mean, I didn't track all of them down. But basically, when you read this verse, it's written le David, so it's really regarding David is the proper way of translating it. This is
Hmm.
a psalm about David, and it's mizmor, it's a psalm. Neum Adonai, or the Tetragrammaton, that the word of the Almighty, Ladoni, to my master. So here it's very
Okay.
clear in the Hebrew that we have the Almighty God who is speaking about someone's master, but it's clearly a human master, human being. And so what happens is in Hebrew the distinction is very clear, but once you translate both of these words as Lord, now it's true, the sophisticated reader will differentiate between a lowercase Lord and an uppercase Lord.
Hmm.
But I think that many people just conflate these two
Hmm.
words, Lord and Lord, and they assume the Lord is the Lord, and that's the
Mm.
Almighty God.
Yeah.
So,
And they can be forgiven for doing that in English for the average reader just to read
100%,
that. Of
100%.
course. But what it should say, in what you're saying, is it says Yud He Vav He, the Tetragrammaton said to my master,
Right.
Adoni. So, okay,
Yes.
that's what
And
it says.
it's
Two
someone,
totally one name and one title,
yeah,
totally different Hebrew
it's
words.
someone that's really, the psalm is a little bit difficult to parse because if David is the author of this psalm, which is quite possible, David is really writing what someone is going to be saying about himself.
Mm.
So there's someone who's speaking about David, and it refers to David as his master. Now, if we go to the next piece here, the next one on the list, this is really one of the things that sends Christian readers into
Oh,
a lot of excitement.
an absolute frenzy, Michael. Let me tell you, the amount of
Feeding frenzy here.
it absolutely is a feeding frenzy, and the theories that I have heard they vary greatly, but it is revolves around Hebrews. Now, this is 145 on the list. We probably should end with this one. 145 on the list. Psalm 110, verse 4, which, as I read, it says. The Lord has sworn and will not relent. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. And the Messianic prophecy fulfilled, according to this list, is that the Messiah would be a priest after Melchizedek's order. Now, the corresponding verse for that, of course, is found in the book of Hebrews. Hebrews says, where the forerunner has, this is Hebrews 6:20, where the forerunner has entered for us, even Jesus, having become a high priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Michael.
So this is this is a lot of work that has to go into this because it is a bit confusing. First of all, I think it's important to try to at least untangle and really unpack what the claim is here, meaning what is the claim that's being made. It seems that I think there are two things that are being said here. I think that the list maker is claiming that the Messiah is going to be a priest, and that somehow they take this to be the cue for this is from this psalm here that ties in this descendant of David to Melchizedek. Hebrew readers get a little bit, sort of taken for a loop when you hear this in English. Melchizedek.
Right.
Melchizedek.
Melchizedek.
It's a hard one.
Melchizedek.
It's Melchizedek. And
Yeah.
so I think what's being said is that this is telling us that the descendant of David, the Messiah, is going to be a priest, not just let's say a political ruler, but will have some kind of a priestly function. And I believe that the ultimate where this is going ultimately is the Christian idea that the Messiah a major part of what he's coming to do is to ultimately be a sacrifice, not just to be a priest in the sense that he'll bring sacrifices, but that I think what they're saying is that what were the priests all about? The priests were about sacrifices, and the sacrifices were about sin. And therefore, we see from this that the Messiah is there to deal with sin. I think that's on some level where the list maker is going with this. The second thing I think they're trying to say, and this is a little bit mysterious because the book of Hebrews makes the pretty incredible claim that Melchizedek was not a human being, but didn't have a mother, didn't have a father, somehow is eternal, and therefore the calculus would be that if this descendant of David, is somehow like Melchizedek, in the same way Melchizedek is somehow eternal, this Messiah must be something eternal, someone eternal as well, and therefore divine. Now, let's just slowly, if we could, spend a few minutes unpacking this. First of all, the Hebrew doesn't say anything about the order of Melchizedek. It has sort of a mysterious sound to it, like some kind of a medieval order of knights or something. Yeah,
like an order of knights or an order of nuns or something like that, some sort of successive...
Or a protocol even. The protocol of... The Hebrew is the word. It's very simple. The Hebrew word here is word, according to the word of Melchizedek. So how you get from word to order... I don't understand.
Well, to be fair though, because the term word in Hebrew is debar. The word that we look at here is devrati, which is a little bit different, and it's certainly very rare within the Tanakh. How are those two different?
Well, it's just a form of the word davar, and it's my word. The word of. The word
That's
of.
Right, my word, or the word of, yes.
The word of, and again, the word that's used here, order. The Hebrew word might be seder for order, or some other term in Hebrew, but it's very hard to connect the thrust of the English being used to the Hebrew davar. Another thing which may escape many, many Christian readers is that Melchizedek may not necessarily be a proper name. Meaning that Melchizedek basically is two Hebrew words. It doesn't have to be conflated into one word. And it would mean my righteous king, my righteous king. Now, David, we know in the Bible, is called a righteous king by God. If you see in the second book of Samuel, chapter 8, verse 15, David is God's king of righteousness. So it may not be a reference. It's one of the problems here. Is this a reference to the Melchizedek who was back in the times of Abraham? Or
it's an interesting thing because if we go back there, it's Genesis chapter 14, I think, is that right? And it's said, and the word, at least the word of Melchizedek, is just a handful of words. He says, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And that's all he says. He says that much, and he's off the stage.
Yes.
You could read this chapter and you could say, well, maybe that fits into the context because it says things like rule in the midst of your enemies. It says that God will execute kings in the day of his wrath and he will judge among the nations and he'll execute it goes on and on and on. And it could be seen as, ruling in the midst of your enemies. That blessing of Melchizedek may have been somehow inspired by God. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, it's as I said, it's a difficult psalm to untangle. I think, though, that there are two ways that you have to go. You either take this term here, Melchizedek, as referring to that person in the time of Abraham, in which case the obvious question is, what is he doing here? If this is a psalm about David,
That's a good point.
Or it's simply referring to David as God, who is God's king of righteousness. It may not have anything to do with this person in the time of Abraham. Now, let's try to understand the claim that's being made. They're saying that this descendant of David, who we understand to be the Messiah, will be a priest like Melchizedek. Now, again, I think where they're going with this is that they're trying to attach to the Messianic figure the role of being someone who deals with sin, who atones for sin, who expiates sin. And the problem is that that is based upon the assumption that if it's talking about Melchizedek at the time of Abraham, it's based upon the assumption that his job was to bring sacrifices to atone for sin. There's really nothing in the Bible that should lead someone to believe that, because he lived long before there was a temple. And so we don't have any reason to believe that at the time of Abraham there was a particular class of people who had the responsibility of bringing sacrifices. We know that in the Bible, everyone brought sacrifices. You didn't need to have a special class of people. So I think that what happens is the Christian reader, again, makes a simple assumption that if there are sacrifices going on, it's got to be from the priestly class, and therefore it's sort of A is B and B is C. But there's no reason to assume that when it discusses this Melchizedek, and even him being a priest like Melchizedek, that the priesthood at that time necessarily had to do with bringing sacrifices. I think that what the Bible would have said, if the Bible was interested in telling us that this descendant of David will have this sacrificial role in terms of atoning for sin, it would have compared him, or given the analogy not to the order or this lineage of Melchizedek, it would have compared him to Aaron, right? The Aaronic priesthood, we know that part of their responsibility was bringing sacrifices. That for sure we know. But there's no evidence whatsoever that Melchizedek functioned in the role of being someone who helped people atone for their sins. Melchizedek probably, if he was a priest, right, what would his role have been? So we know that priests didn't only involve themselves with bringing sacrifices. Priests also served to administer justice. We see that in Deuteronomy chapter 17, that a major function of the priests was to be the administrators and the decisors of justice. And so when it says that he was the king, this Melchizedek was the king of Shalem, so that was probably his role, that his priestly role in that sense was to serve as the king of this society and to administer justice. And there's no reason to assume that he had a special exclusive role to preside over the bringing of sacrifices to atone for sin, because anyone could have done it back then.
I was just going to say that the word that is used here, though, for priest, of course, is Kohen. And when people see the word Cohen, or they think Cohen, they think of in the order of Aaron, and therefore they think that somehow there's a God-approved connection to for Melchizedek as some sort of approved priest. I mean, there's different perspectives as far as who Melchizedek might have been. Was he Shem? A lot of people say yes, he was. Traditionally, they say it was Shem. Other people say no, he was just a priest of a Canaanite religion. But in any case, I guess we have to define what the word Kohen means. How would you define it? Is it best to say simply one who serves?
One who serves, exactly.
Okay.
And it's interesting that the Hebrew Kohen is related etymologically to the word kivein, direction, and to move in a certain direction, to be focused in a certain direction. Normally, right, we associate that with, the priestly service in the temple. But again, what we just saw is that the direction that the priests also functioned in was to direct people towards the proper living in terms of justice and righteousness. And so, we can't extract from a passage in the Bible more than is justified. And it's really inappropriate to sort of retrofit Melchizedek with this job description that only became relevant many, many hundreds of years later. It wasn't until the time when we had a temple that was built in the sanctuary in Exodus chapter 25. It wasn't only until then that a particular class of people were charged with offering sacrifices. And again, it also, we began tonight talking about the Thanksgiving offering. It also it plays into the Christian misconception that really sacrifices were just all about forgiveness. And the truth is that there were many, many kinds of sacrifices that were brought. Some were brought when you were thankful. Some were brought, when there were certain holidays. There weren't just sacrifices for sin. But what happens in the mind of the Christian is that they associate the priest with sacrifices, which is, again, artificial, because priests did more than that. And then the sacrifices are artificially thought of as only dealing with atonement from sin. So basically what happens is, because they come to the text with certain preconceptions, that colors their reading of the text. And it seems that, at least I'm trying to read this text as simply as possible, that if it's describing David, which to me is the most reasonable way of reading it, because it's hard to understand why it would be, somehow focusing on this character who lived so long before. But what it would seem to be saying is that it's talking about David, who is God's righteous king, and that he will serve as a priest in the terms of the priestly function of administering justice. And we see in Isaiah chapter 11 that that's one of the major job descriptions of the Messiah, is to preside over the administration of justice in the world. So it's pretty clear that this is a major function of the Messiah. We see it in many places. And to now claim that Psalm 110 out of the blue is somehow, this is telling us that no, the Messiah, boys and girls, is coming to do much more than preside over a world through reigning as a just king, but he is coming to himself die as a sacrifice, and through his sacrificial death, salvation come to the world if they'll believe in him. That's just not here. And I think that's the sort of taking this much further than there's a right to take it. Finally, I would say that the assertion that the book of Hebrews makes about Melchizedek is just simply without any basis in the scriptures. The Hebrew Bible doesn't tell us that he is without mother, without father. He's just mentioned as a poor innocent guy. So it's hard to understand where this comes from, this seeing Melchizedek as some kind of a mysterious divine being that is eternal. So I think that Psalm 110 to me is much to do about nothing. That it doesn't have any of the shock and awe that Christians like to see here. It doesn't have the ability to embarrass Pharisees. It doesn't have the ability to prove that the David's descendant is going to be God himself. That's based upon simply a mistranslation of the text. It doesn't prove that the Messiah's role is going to be to die as a sin sacrifice. It's just not there. And to me, it's a real desperate grasping for straws.
Absolutely. So I guess because it is the book of Hebrews that says that the priesthood is done away with, then all of a sudden there's a necessity to have a priesthood. Where do we get that from? Well, let's go with this, and they come up with the Melchizedek solution.
I met someone once, a long time ago, who was a Christian minister, who sent me a little article that he wrote explaining why he was leaving the faith and embracing Judaism. And it was very interesting because I had never heard anyone really share this kind of path before. He said that it was because of the book of Hebrews. He said because, I think it's the 8th chapter, if I'm not mistaken, primarily, but in the book of Hebrews, he said, it speaks about a better priest and a better testimony and a better king and a better and a better and a better. The whole text there is basically presenting the idea that there was this old rotten institution called Judaism, and now God is giving us something new and improved, better and better and better. And he said that what bothered him was that he couldn't understand why God didn't get it right the first time around. Meaning that the Bible says in Psalm 19 that the Torah of God is perfect, Torah Hashem Tamima. And you can't improve on perfection.
That's right.
And so when he read the book of Hebrews, which was basically claiming that everything in the old scriptures, the Old Testament, was fading away, it's really inferior, it's not really good, and it had to be really finalized and improved with the New Testament and a new high priest and a new temple and a new priesthood, etc. He said that's what got him to reject the Christian scriptures, because he felt he saw through this claim.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, there it is. We'll leave it there, and we're going to be kicking off from, where are we up to now? It's number 146. Next time we get back together, my friend, and we've made progress, and that's certainly one that we can sink our teeth into. So I'm glad that we got into Psalm 110. Rabbi Michael Skobac, Director of Education and Counseling for Jews for Judaism in Canada. The website is jewsforjudaism.ca, jewsforjudaism.ca. Make sure you visit the website, because it is full of so many valuable resources. My friend, thank you very much for coming back on the program.
My great pleasure, Jono.
Always wonderful to have you on, even though it's Halloween. But in the meantime, dear listeners, be blessed and be set apart by the truth of our Father's word. Shalom.